This story takes place in a very small town called Elbert, Colorado, that's very far out in the middle of nowhere. Like a grocery trip, took a 45-minute drive just to get to a store. I moved out there in the summer of 2013, when I was about 11. My family lived on an 8-acre piece of property in a fairly thick pine forest, with the house just outside the very edge of it. The driveway to the house was a super crappy, super long dirt road that led out to the main street that had to be a little less than an eighth of a mile away from the house. To this day, I think that place was the most beautiful, peaceful place that I've ever gone to. The only sounds that could be heard were those of nature and our chickens, as we could not hear the rare car that would pass by. The nights were the best part about the place, though. Because of the lack of city lights, I was able to see every detail of the night sky, down to the dimmest of stars. Because of the darkness, however, you weren't able to see a single thing below the horizon of the night sky. Along with that, there were several packs of coyotes that lived out there, and every night they'd all be howling at each other. With enough of them, the noise would almost sound like water. The only thing that really sucked about the property, however, was the walk that we had to make just to take the trash out. The garbage company would only accept the cans that were brought out to the main road. We'd normally take the trash out before it got dark, but occasionally I'd forget it and would have to do it all at dark, which I normally didn't mind. The trip would normally be super peaceful to walk it out, and we had headlamps at the ready so that we could actually see where we were going in the dark. Well, the summer before I moved out, there was a night where I forgot to take out the trash during the day, and the batteries on the headlamps were dead. This meant I had to try to navigate my own way down our driveway, almost completely blind. I went outside and stood next to the trash cans for a minute or two, staring into the darkness in order to hopefully adjust my eyes. Staring into the darkness, though, I felt like there was something off. The normal coyote sound was gone, and for some reason, my eyes would just not adjust to the darkness. I kept staring into the abyss, looking for any sign that my eyes might be adjusting, but to no luck. Then, this terrible feeling tore its way into my chest. The best way that I can describe it is as if this darkness, this abyss that I was staring into, was staring back. No, into me. I was frozen with fear. I knew I was alone out there, but something told me that if I were to walk into the darkness, I would not be returning. I continued staring, but almost unable to look away from the darkness for a long time, before my mom came out to check on me. Her opening the door seemed to break me out of my trance, and I ran to her and started crying. She looked at me confused and noticed that I still hadn't taken out the trash. After telling her what I felt, she laughed a little and gave me some encouraging words, telling me that if there was anything out there, our dogs would have surely noticed it by now. She then told me to come back in 10 minutes for ice cream. I turned back around and walked back to our trash cans, shaking. I had never been so scared in my life. And what of nothing? I chuckled to myself, realizing the absurdity of it. When I took my eyes back off the ground, the chuckle turned back into a cry. I realized that I wasn't scared of nothing. I was terrified that there was something out there that I could not see, waiting for me to leave the light of the house lamp to attack. Then, the coyote started, and my eyes started adjusting. Whatever might have been out there was gone, along with all of my fear. The tears stopped along with most of the fear, and I was able to start dragging the trash cans down. The walk was somewhat scary, though I was able to let the sound of the coyotes distract me. By the time I got back up to my house, I felt safe again, but I could not stop thinking about that dark abyss. While I lived at the house, that was probably my scariest encounter. There were other scarier encounters while I was there, but the only one could even slightly relate to the others takes place at a friend's house. For the sake of privacy, I'll refer to this friend as D. D had a property that was about 10 minutes from mine, and we shared the same forest, with the only separation being a road in between us. We had been hanging out for a while that day, playing a bunch of video games, when I had an idea to go out in the dark and explore his property. He agreed, and so we waited until night fell. After a few more hours of video games and dinner, it finally seemed dark enough to go out, so we did. We were wandering his 7-acre property, being pretty stupid, loud, and making half-assed attempts at trying to get at each other, a little scared. After some time of this, we eventually wandered into a clearing, and I just guess the attempts settled in for both of us. At the same time, we looked around, concerned. There was something off, and it felt like we were being watched. Trying to keep a good mood, and maybe trying to keep my mind off whatever was making us feel this way, I suggested we make a scary video to scare little D's brother. D laughed and agreed, and pulled out his phone and started recording. We were acting like we kept seeing things in the woods. I would throw a stick when the camera was facing away, make a weird grunting noise, and anything and such to make the video creepier. We both were having a good time. However, deep down, I felt like something was very off, and I think that he did too. Then, out of nowhere, a twig snapped behind us. I automatically assumed that D had thrown something, but when I looked at him to confirm, he was looking at me to see if I had thrown it. Now, before this moment, I was trying very hard to make my voice sound as scared as possible for the video. However, as soon as I heard this, I didn't need to try anymore. We stared in the direction that the twig snap came from for a second, hoping to make something out, but to no avail. Once again, my eyes would not adjust to the darkness, except this time, instead of physically standing in the light, I was inside of the darkness. Partially for the video, and partially for my sanity, I whispered, "Run." D nodded slightly, his face illuminated by his phone, and we started sprinting in the direction of his house. I don't think I had ran so hard in my life beforehand, but there was a feeling in my gut still telling me that we weren't fast enough, that we needed to hide. D must have felt the same thing. He took the lead and led us to a nearby cat shed. A motion sensor light flicked on as we passed by, and we got in the shed as quickly as we could. After getting the door shut, D turned on his light, revealing the inside of the shed. At the time, it seemed to me like the cats were hiding from something. However, looking back on it, they were probably just sleeping in their beds that were in a corner of the shed. This freaked me out even more. D stated climbing the wall of the shed and led us out onto almost a shelf-like structure that had a window that we could look out of. D sat on one side of the window, and I sat on the other, so that we were facing each other and we could see both angles from the window. Eventually, with the light on outside and the added comfort of a roof over our head, we started to calm down, and the focus on the video became apparent. As we were talking about what might have been out there, the motion sensor light turned off, dropping the outside back into the dark. We went quiet as the uneasy feeling washed over us again. To me, it didn't feel like we were being watched anymore, more like we were being looked for. We started intently at looking out the window, looking for signs of anything, when I thought I started hearing footsteps. Having a wall between us and the steps muffled them, so I couldn't be sure what I was hearing. I asked D about them, and he said that he had heard them too. However, I'm pretty sure he was saying that for the video. We went quiet again, listening. Then I heard the footsteps get slightly louder. One of the cats starts rubbing up against us, which distracted us and caused us to turn around and start petting him. Because who wouldn't pet a cat? As we were petting him, the outdoor motion sensor light flicked on. I felt goosebumps crawl up my arms to my face as we slowly turned around. We looked out the window and saw nothing. D told me that we should get inside, and I agreed with him. We carried the cat back down to its bed and got ready to make a 50-yard sprint directly to his house. He opened the door, I shut it, and then we were in the cold, dark woods, running as hard as we could from whatever turned on that light. After what felt like forever sprinting, we finally got to D's front door and we rushed inside. We slammed his sliding glass door and didn't sleep until we saw the sun rising the next morning. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week, I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods, and we lived for the next year. Though these encounters were terrifying at the time, a lot of it can be easily explained by me just freaking myself out. There was nothing out there during the trash can story, and at Dee's house, we found raccoon prints the next morning, outside of the cat shed. None of these things ever stopped me from loving the woods, and within a week, I was certain that I was just making things up to myself. I continued loving the woods. We lived for the next year that we lived there, but eventually, my family and I ended up moving out. My dad got a job offer in Minnesota that would improve our financial situation and not force my dad to a 2-hour commute every day. Minnesota, however, proved to be the worst place that I have lived in, at least for the first year or two. After living in such a small town and adapting to my friends in Elbert so much, I found it very hard to make any friends in Minnesota. I was constantly thinking about my friends and the girlfriend I had left in Elbert, and refused to work to make friends, and the people at my new school didn't particularly seem to like me. I would still talk to my other friends almost every night, playing video games and stuff with them, which was almost the only thing that seemed to make me any sort of happy while I was out there. With my mental health in the garbage can, and my lack of any friends, my parents agreed to let me go out to Elbert during the summer and visit. After the first visit, my mental health was way better, and I started opening up to other people at the new school as well. So, my parents agreed to make the Elbert trips annual, as long as I planned them. So, every year since then, I've been visiting my friends in Elbert. The most recent visit is the reason that I'm writing this. Every year I would hang out with my friends who I'll call K, T, and D. The same D from the story I just told you. Because of stupid teenager drama, they would almost never hang out together. One of my favorite things to do with them was, ironically, go squatching. For those that don't know, squatching is looking for Bigfoot, typically making their hypothetical calls and using other communication methods of theirs in hope to find one. This was simply an excuse to go yell in the forest at night for me. This most recent visit, I had finally managed to get K, T, and D to all hang out together. We had planned on making a short film that was based on these stupid videos that T and I used to make. We ended up trying to film it, but ended up with like one scene before we decided to just play video games instead. Well, one day after dinner, the group came up with an idea to make a squatching video. T, K, and I filmed one last year, so we figured that we would do another one this year to try and make this an annual thing. We took K's little brother out with us to film, and we started recording our video. The sun was still up, so it had no intention of being any sort of scary or funny ironic video. We wandered around for an hour or so, making shitty Australian accents and shouting for Bigfoot, when Kay had the idea that we could split up and look for Sasquatch. So we did. We each went off on our own way in the woods, with the cameraman following me, each making the occasional squatch call and tree knock. We had some walkie-talkies with us, so we were able to tell each other when we were making a call. After some time, D, T, and I found each other and decided to group up and meet K up in a clearing. We started walking, and K came in over the radio, saying that he was about to make a call. We waited, and then from the forest came the most terrifying noise I have ever heard somebody make. The best way that I could describe it was like a dying elephant that had a smoking problem. Then, he came in over the radio. "Was that you guys?" he asked. We assumed that he was just joking around for the video, so we joked back. "No, mate, we've pissed the Squatch off. We need to get out of here. Meet us back at your house." And we ran out of the forest quickly when we met up with Kay. He apparently had cut himself on some barbed wire, and that, plus the terrifying scream we heard him make earlier, seemed to put us off. So we decided to stop for the time being. We went inside and played Halo for hours, messing with each other and doing other stupid stuff, not mentioning what had happened while squatching the rest of the night. When night had more than passed, and it was around midnight, we decided to go back outside and continue squatching, this time without a camera and a bunch of flashlights. We decided to go pretty deep into the forest before not making any calls, as to not wake Kay's family and neighbors up. Eventually, we got to the point that we had to split up from earlier and had to decide what to do. After talking about it some, we decided to see where Kay had run off to. Then I made the first squatch call of the night. After the call, the woods went completely silent. In my previous story, I talked about the abyss watching me. This was almost the same, except it felt as if the forest were listening to us. We laughed about it, poked fun at each other, trying to creep one another out, and started walking. Kay led us pretty deep into his woods, and eventually stopped in a small opening, showing us that this had been where he had radioed us from before the call. The thing is, Kay didn't refer to the call as his. He referred to it as one of ours. This didn't register at the moment, but thinking back on it, definitely gives me the creeps. After a bit more joking around, Kay decided to take us to the boundary of his property, where he had cut himself. We walked in a straight line, toward the fence, and I think Kay figured we'd follow the fence to where he cut himself. As we walked deeper into the forest, though, our jokes started to die down. The silence, darkness, and this feeling started to get to us. We were starting to suspect that we were being watched. We arrived at the fence and started walking along when Kay stopped, confused. I looked at where his flashlight was pointing, and there was a fence. However, the fence was almost dented, if that makes any sense. It looked like something had come through and simply stepped on the fence with enough weight that the fence couldn't bring itself to its natural position. I shined my flashlight into the other property and asked Kay about it. I can't remember exactly what he told me, but I think I remember him saying it was a large piece of property owned by Native American land and had once been sacred or something like that. That was probably terribly wrong, so take that information with a grain of salt. Our group looked at each other. "Let's go over it," I remember myself saying. "Worst case scenario, we find whosever property it is, and we could tell him about the broken gate." This was obviously not the worst case scenario, especially out in the country like this, but we continued anyway. After going through some pretty heavy woods, we found a clearing, and then we felt something awful. The hair on the back of all of our necks stood up at once, and we started hearing twig snaps in every which direction. This was a massive change from the previously quiet forest that we had just been walking through. We quickly shined our lights every which way, looking for anything that could be causing our fear, when Dee's light stopped on something. "Guys, do you see that?" We all shined our lights on the spot that he was looking at. I couldn't see anything at first and was about to say no when I made out what looked like a reflection of eyes. We each confirmed, one by one, each of us starting to make out the eyes. Then we did something stupid. We started walking toward it. Maybe this was because there were 4 of us and 1 pair of eyes. Or maybe it was how luring they looked. But every step we took, the more they faded out, until we couldn't see them anymore. Then, we felt the hairs of the back of our necks stand up even more than ever, as if pointing in the direction of something that did not approve of us being there. We stood back to back, making a square, as we felt the presence circling us. "Guys, let's get out of here," one of the group members said. We all nodded and waited, and then when we felt the time was right, we sprinted. We all ran as fast as we could, jumping over the fallen fence, through the forest, and until eventually I saw the house. I heard the others run by me, hidden by the forest, when suddenly I stopped. "Ryan, help!" My heart sank. I had just heard the other three run by me, yet this was the perfect voice of Kay, calling for my help. I shoved the thought that this could be Kay out of my head. After all, I had just heard all three of my friends run by me. I began sprinting again, hoping to catch up with Kay. After sprinting for a minute or two, I caught up with them, beginning to slow down, almost at the house. I caught up with Kay and was about to try to talk to him when we both flinched backward, almost falling. Just to the right of us, there was a crashing thud of something that had just hit the ground. We quickly recovered and sprinted in toward the door, urging the others on. When we finally got back to Kay's house, we slammed the door behind us and had to just rest, panting, when we all seemed to calm down. Kay asked what the hell happened out there. We all went around and shared what they saw. D said he saw the reflection of eyes, and more than what was just in the clearing. Kay said he saw the reflection of eyes in the clearing and heard the two thuds that freaked us both out. T said he might have seen the eyes in the clearing and some yellow-red ones as we're closing the door. I stated what I saw, but decided to leave out the voice since I wasn't, and am still not sure I heard what I heard. We sat down and almost immediately started searching up cryptids, looking for all other possible stories like ours. Within half an hour, our primary theories were of a goatman, a Jersey devil, and possibly a Wendigo. Almost in response to our theories, we had heard two ever-so-quiet footsteps on the roof. Eventually, we got to sleep, but after that, we never spoke a word of it again. Maybe a year or so later, I was trying to creep myself out when I found a story about Wendigos. These stories sounded familiar to my experience, but didn't seem to be quite right. Well, that led into a rabbit hole, and eventually, I learned about skinwalkers. Since then, I've loved hearing stories about them, and am very fascinated with what they are and how they hunt. I've stopped believing recently, however. After rethinking my tale for the 100th time, I'm 90% sure that what we heard and saw was just a horse that we got onto the bad side of, which is oddly common, I guess. What really spooks me, however, is when I let the 10% wonder and think that it might have been something paranormal. Either way, I don't understand how Kay still lives on that property. I'll be visiting him this summer, so I'll see them again, but hopefully we won't encounter whatever we might have last time. 2014 to 2015. I was 12. I saw a hairless, not extremely skinny, but definitely malnourished, pale, nude man-woman thing literally just hop across the street on all fours, from one forest to the other, at like around 1 to 3 a.m. Except it definitely wasn't a man or a woman. It was about 50 to 60 yards away, under the only streetlight that worked on the entire road. It lasted like 3 seconds before it vanished again. It didn't even notice us. As soon as it was out of sight, I started to run for my life. We get back to my house in literally seconds, break everything behind us, and lock every door as fast as our 12-year-old legs would carry us. A friend of mine was with me. We were in the middle of a discussion, just chilling, so he was facing the opposite direction and didn't see it. All it took was my facial expression for him to start moving. He even started running a second before me, and he didn't even see it. That's how petrified I was. I described it to him at my house. Him, being into spooky YouTube stuff, told me to Google the rake. So I did. Shitted myself, only a little, when I saw how identical some of the fake rake photos and some of the rake art looked like. I tried my best to get some real information, but there's way too many memes. It just led me to questioning my own sanity. I pretty much gave up hope. Occasionally, searching rake or the rake every couple months. Still looking 5+ years later. That's how I found what I found. If you don't believe me, then please just move on. I had to share this because I'm 300% positive others have gone through the same thing as me. There are plenty of crackheads and drug addicts here, but I don't think even all the drugs in the world could do this to somebody. It looks so human, but so feral and outlandish at the same time. I'd be willing to bet my dick and balls it wasn't human, or any creature with a name at that. I'm also in Ontario, and I live on Lake Simcoe. There's literally nothing out here except for trees and the occasional streetlight every kilometer that actually works, so it certainly wasn't a prank. I don't know what I saw that night, but it's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. This latest encounter took place on Friday, August 5th, 2019, at approximately 7:30 p.m. as I was walking from my Jeep to the duplex I live in after getting back from work. The sun was setting behind me as I pulled into the short driveway in front of my home. The sun had gone down to the point where it was below the treetops, yet still not at the horizon, so there was still some ambient light left in the day. It was incredibly hot that day, like pushing 100, and it had only cooled off a little bit by that point, with the humidity still at 100%. My neighborhood is lower middle class, so all of the houses are small, but there's a bit of space between each of them, giving everyone a little elbow room at least. The street I live on is a cut-through between two parts of our small town, so even though we are pretty rural, the road out front actually gets pretty busy sometimes. My place is just a few yards off the street, and I have a backyard that extends out about 20 feet behind the building before stopping abruptly at the patch of trees dividing my neighbor's lawn from mine. As usual, I parked in the gravel about 20 feet from the edge of the screened-in patio where my girlfriend was sitting on the porch swing. She gets off work much earlier than I do, and she is usually there with a drink in hand each weekday when I got home. None of this seems relevant. I'm just trying to cover anything and everything this time. I parked on the left side of my house, grabbed my things, got out, and started walking around the front of my Jeep toward the house. As soon as I got out of the vehicle, I began to hear a clicking sound in my ears, but I thought it was just sinus pressure or something at first because it sounded like it was inside my ear canal. My girlfriend was on the phone, but she smiled and waved at me as I walked up, and it's at that exact moment when I looked up at her that I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I quickly looked over, and there it was, as clear as can be, standing at the edge of that little patch of trees. Per usual, as soon as I saw it, it saw me. For anyone that hasn't heard my first post, the thing is roughly 3 feet tall and shaped like a starving child with a possible deformity. It had no discernible features or shape, and it is essentially just a flat black space in the place where its substance and form should be. It's almost as if it was cut out of reality, or like the physical space that it occupies exists in just total voided out negative space. I don't know how else to describe it. That's the best I've got. Something very different that freaked me out about this encounter happened in that instant we first noticed each other. When the thing turned its head area toward me and leaned back off the tree a bit, I saw its arms were extending, maybe 20 or 30 feet straight up in the trunk of the tree and into some of the leafier branches at the top. This completely froze me in my tracks for a second, even after swearing that I would be ready for it the next time it showed up. Its arms were thin and filled with the same empty blackness as before, but they just didn't seem to be natural. Its arms were almost fluid-like in their motion, or slithering like snakes, sort of. It's so tough to explain because the whole thing never does seem to belong in its way at all to its surroundings. But again, the way it moves its body really just doesn't line up with the way it's shaped. I'm still not sure if it's the actual motions of the thing, or if it is a lack of any three-dimensional form, but looking at this thing is so disorienting. It's hard to tell what it's doing when it moves, how big it really is, or even how far away it is. I can only be for sure of its location this time, because I know where the tree is that it was standing against. This all happened in about 3 seconds, and just like every other time, I have a brief second or two where my brain is just unable to process what I'm seeing in front of me, even though I've seen it before several times now. I'm not actually sure if it ran from me first, as I turned and ran away from it at top speed that time, though it was definitely startled to see me. We were much closer to one another the first time than any other time, so maybe it went fight instead of flight in that instance. I don't know. That's assuming it even thinks and reacts like a rational, living creature. It was just so much more creepy this time around with those crazy arms, like a demented evil little inflatable tube man, which I'm sure sounds funny until you actually see it yourself. I hadn't gotten a look at this thing clearly since the first time, and it's been so long since then that the memory of that first encounter has slowly been fading away. It was roughly the same as before in shape and size, but no eyes at all this time that I could see, and yet again I am struck by how infinitely dark this thing is. I know this is something that I keep repeating, but I still don't think I have accurately depicted just how empty the area it fills is. Every time that I have seen this thing, it has been as if I spotted it doing something that it shouldn't have been. Now I don't believe it was surprised as it seemed to be when it seen me. If it weren't for the jarring and bizarre sight of its long, clumsy arms, I might have reacted quicker. But I did alright at the time, I guess. Possibly because when I saw it standing there, so plainly out in the open, a weird sense of validation for my crazed post and all the ensuing drama came over me. At that moment, right then, I was totally sure I was going to get a picture of it, or that when I yelled to my girlfriend, she would then turn and see it standing there as well. I didn't react the way I did previous times for sure, because I dropped my tool bags on the ground and went running into the backyard at a full sprint while yelling my girlfriend's name. I guess it didn't seem excited enough when I called out to her, because my girlfriend just held up the wait a minute finger while slowly and casually standing up off the swing bench to try and see what I was running towards. I reached for my phone but immediately realized that it was in the backpack that I had just dropped, which caused me to briefly freeze and almost go back for it. But then I kind of just double-clutched the decision instead and took off running after it. I honestly thought I had better get a chance of getting to it than getting back to my bag, digging at my phone, and then running over to get a picture. I legit thought I was going to catch it, but I never got anywhere close in the end. Stupid, I know. Get your camera out, you idiot. Also, in case you're wondering, I have no clue what I would have done if I had gotten close enough to grab it. Well, I must have lost sight of it for a split second during that brief pause, because I can't remember how it got into the next position I saw it in. But it had somehow now gone from having its head turned toward me and standing on 2 legs to being down on all 4s, bounding away from the tree and back into the brush. It happened so fast it was like it didn't turn or move to be facing the other direction. It just all of a sudden was facing the other direction in a different shape, moving a totally different way. I was about 15 feet away from it as it ran off and just kind of disappeared behind me in some bushes, just like when I saw it across the field in front of my friend's house. Also, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but from this encounter and the previous one, I got the impression that it was more comfortable on all 4s. I didn't and could not hear any sound at all coming from the creature, via vocalization or interaction with the environment. This also includes telepathically. Possibly, I didn't hear anything this time because of the tapping sound in my ears, or perhaps it's because there is a lot of action in my neighborhood, and it gets a little noisy. I did not follow the thing into the woods because simultaneously, when I lost sight of it, I also got distracted by the sight of something up in the tree out of the corner of my eye. When I got to the tree, I looked up just in time to see both of the thing's arms sliding and slithering back up the tree, moving like a tape measure made of black spaghetti being retracted back into its holster. It looked like it had either detached its arms and ran off without them, or even maybe that there was another one up in the tree that had been reaching down to it, which is precisely what I thought was going on at the time. For a brief moment, I idiotically felt that I had cornered another one of them, and it was up in the tree, that I also might catch it somehow. Regardless, at this point, I was now standing at the base of the tree, looking way up the trunk where I saw its hands, which I haven't seen at any other time, with slender finger-like things tapping on a high branch, making a typing motion as if it had a keyboard up there, sitting on the tree limb. It was then that I realized what the sound in my ears was. It was the very distinct sound of typing on a keyboard, although the noise in my ear was not any louder now that I was closer to the tree than it was when I was across the backyard. The noise wasn't loud in general, but it sounded like it was right in my ear, and it sounded familiar, like the keyboard on my computer inside my home. Obviously, this last statement may be overthinking, but at the moment, I felt like it was a memory of the sound of me typing being relayed in my ear, rather than a noise coming from an outside source, if that makes any sense. It happened so fast again, and after just a second or two, its arms slid up behind the bottom of the branch as its hands simultaneously stopped the typing and pulled down behind the top of the same tree branch, where they both disappeared completely. The lack of shadow and depth put against something that does reflect light is a difficult thing to explain until you actually see it. It makes it near impossible to tell distances or even what direction anything is moving, so it almost looks like it's always coming towards you or going away from you. As soon as the arms and hands were gone entirely, I briefly checked behind me to make sure it wasn't still there, and gave a quick look around the trees for the thing, making sure to keep aware of the treetop area. But I never saw anything again. I then turned back around and walked around the tree a couple of times, but I saw nothing up in the sparse covering that the tree provided. I checked all around and even threw some rocks up there to see if I could get something to move around, but obviously nothing. The sound in my ears stopped as quickly as it started, and I knew then that the thing was gone. By this point, my girlfriend had hung up the phone and was standing in the doorway to the porch, shouting to me, asking what is going on, and now down in the backyard wondering how the hell I'm going to explain this. When I asked my girlfriend if she saw that, she responded with these two deflating words, "Saw what?" And it just made my heart sink so low because I knew it had just happened again. It was right there, and apparently caught in an awkward position, which seemingly it had nowhere to go. My girlfriend was right there for validation as well, I thought, and yet again, I got nothing. I explained it away as saying that I thought I saw a black bear, but it must have been a raccoon, and my girlfriend shrugged it off quickly enough, only after giving me shit for throwing rocks at what I foolishly told her was a raccoon. Not only is this thing incredibly frustrating with how it continually is able to avoid giving me proof, but the whole scenario just made me feel like an idiot. I feel like it tricked me for some reason, but I don't know why, which in itself is also eating me up inside. I've gotten over trying to piece together the specifics of the event, as well as they are all similar in some way, but different in others. The arms, flashing eyes, turning into a dog thing, the sound it made, I mean, what the hell is this thing? To be clear, I honestly don't know if it was a crawler, but this is the best place, so please bear with me. Every summer, me and my friends used to go to this camp in southern Illinois on an isolated huge plot of land with beautiful locations. If you live near this area, well, you've probably heard of it, because it's pretty popular and is honestly a good camp with great people, but isn't cheap and has a long history though. But due to privacy, I won't say the name of it. This is actual history, which is what makes it feel off. Throughout this camp, there are different units too, host different genders and ages. One of these units, one night more than a couple years back, all 4 to 5 cabins burned down mysteriously, but luckily, no one were in them at the time. There were no signs of arson or any sort of aggressive behavior, no records of lightning, thunder, or any other weather-related things. They were confused but brushed it off, but clearly some people were weirded out. One thing I won't forget to mention is that this area has definitely been known to be a location of past Native American locations. I'll put it short, but a group of pastors from Europe came to America over a period of time, and sadly, most were killed except for 2. Some were painful, and others were quick but cruel, such as a tomahawk to the head and lit on fire. These were actual people, and I'll post about them later. There is more, such as genuine adults being afraid because of sightings of something, but just brushing it off as another camper or adult. Let's get on to what made me hold a little fear. There's something off about it, but it is a fun place. And one summer night before 6th grade, most were sleeping, and I was, until I heard something, which is strange because I was born with a hearing disorder, so I have to wear hearing aids and can hear good with them, but without, I can't hear well. I put them in and listened. It sounded like footsteps, but everyone understands that feeling that something isn't right, and my idiot little self called out hello, despite the feeling of dread. It stopped, then unsteadily started coming towards my direction. All the cabins are on stilts and are connected by a big catwalk. There are about 6 of them in this unit. I got worried and then hid under my sleeping bag on the bottom bed. Bunk beds were in these cabins, about 5 in each, and the front was opened up and had no door. It sounds like normal adult footsteps, but were off and in a slow, desperate rate. It stopped right outside the cabin, and it was quiet for a while. I looked up for a second, and I only saw an outline on something visibly taller than any adult, maybe 7-foot-ish. Then I burrowed my head in the pillow, and after a few long minutes, it slowly walked away, off the catwalk, walked to the gravel road that connects the camp together, and this is where I honestly held fear. For the next half hour, it just drug its foot or feet in the gravel road constantly, and would stop, just to do it again, and it would start getting close and then would drag away. It was horrible. Then it groaned, which was terrifying, because it confirmed that it was something smarter, or at least not a normal animal. It sounded similar to a human, but rough, and I could feel it in the air. It was so weird. The worst part was the scream or howl that came from the distance towards the uninhabited part of the camp. I can't really explain it, but it definitely didn't sound like a human. That thing was dragging in the road. It suddenly stopped, and then I could hear it bolt off in the other direction. I was young and it was so off-putting, but this probably wasn't as dangerous and scary as other stories, but some of the takeaways are that this took place in the southern Illinois area, near the Kentucky border, and took place in an area with a history of unsettling events. I have never heard the term crawler, and since this all began, we haven't known what to refer to this as or who to contact. I'm still at a loss for words to explain just how scary this is. Most all because it is no doubt something not human or any known animal. This is taking place nightly, behind a close friend's home, not far away, and started last fall. The area is north in Florida, in a very rural area. Behind her house is wild bamboo that has completely overgrown the land surrounding the ruins of an old house that literally collapsed or imploded somewhere approximately 15 years ago. These things have not only taken over back there, but have been seen by several of us, but never in the daylight. This started with a mound appearing that wasn't there prior to last fall, that was fairly large size and built entirely of heavy debris from that house, and broken bamboo as well, which alone is scary, considering no person can break through that in such a way due to the strength. Since it first appeared, This mound has constantly expanded in width and height to an alarming size and has several cave-like openings in it. Now, they have dug pretty large-sized tunnels going underneath it. Now, I'm concerned as one of them have been seen coming out of the bamboo and underneath her house, under the addition in the back where her dogs at night will not go alone and act purely terrified even though still inside the house. We now know that's because these dogs have known this thing, or more than one has been under her kitchen floor nightly for who knows how long. The land around the old house alone has a very strong and bothersome vibe to it alone. Now this. What we have seen is a very thin and pale figure which doesn't appear to have normal legs and very elusive and hostile feeling. Aside from very sinister looking yellow glowing eyes, I haven't seen, nor has anyone else got any other facial features. What do we do? I want to get documentation of this, which I do have pictures of this structure they built over time, but none of them will dare attempt to even go out her back door at night, as the edge of the bamboo and ruins are very close by. So, I live in Wyoming, Michigan, about a walking distance away from Resurrection Cemetery. If you look it up on Google Maps, you will see it has a tree line surrounding it. The tree line closest to the woods is where I've seen it almost all times. I have multiple stories, but I'll try to share only the most haunting ones. The first encounter I had was with my sister. She was going to take a walk through the cemetery. It was late at night, and I had the gut instinct to go with her, so I did. We decided to play Pokemon Go, because why not? I didn't like the forested area around it, especially this big pine tree visible via a maintenance path that led to the crematorium. I was scared out of my mind, but we went towards the crematorium, away, to get a Pokestop and a Jigglypuff. We had to go so close that we were on the maintenance path, but the nicer cobblestone half. It was when I looked to my right that I first saw it, hunched over. It looked like a normal human being, but more terrifying. It appeared to have seen me too, because it stood up as well. I could tell it was tall. I'd estimate about 7 feet in height. I told my sister to run, and we ran home where I proceeded to pray in my room for a while. My mom had a sighting as well. She had mentioned seeing something gray hunched in the top of the pine tree I mentioned earlier, watching us. When she looked back, it was gone. Safe to say, we went home early that day. I consider myself slightly psychic, and when I closed my eyes, sometime around the time that she saw it, I saw 2 big gaping holes staring back at me. My mom described the creature, and I recognized it as something I'd drawn a few weeks before. I burned this image, but I have since redrawn it. My most recent sighting, and the one that kept me from going back to the cemetery, happened in broad daylight with a friend. I'll keep his name hidden for privacy, but we decided to go to said cemetery after class. College program, but for high school freshmen. We wandered around the cemetery for hours until my arms started hurting and I decided that we should go home for a snack. As we walked, my anxiety heightened. I had told him about the crawler, but I suspected we wouldn't have to worry as it was daytime. As we were walking along the sidewalk, about to reach the tree line, I saw a dead squirrel dog arm in the middle of the sidewalk. I looked up and I saw the crawler run straight into the tree line. It was gray and ran on all 4s rather than just 2 legs. I told my friend to run, and he did. We both ran until we reached the intersection.